She is the Director for Concepts for the Futures and Concepts Center with AFC. She's going to lead an informative and entertaining discussion with other scientists, futurists, and commercial experts to explain how these concepts for the future battlefield influence where the Army invests today. Joining her, our panelists include Jean Kettle, Chief Scientist for Futures and Concepts Center, also at AFC. Tien Pham, Chief Scientist for the Computational Information Sciences Directorate at U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command. Chris Milroy, Senior Data Scientist for Public Sector at NVIDIA, and John Morgan, Partner Federal DoD and the Army Co-Lead at IBM. Team, please come on up. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. Yeah, of course. At quarter to start. So this will tell you when you're done, and I'm happy to help you with questions. I'll move around and yeah, of course. Right. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I always like when people say you're here for an entertaining discussion. Please be quiet. Right. So,
that's what they hired me for, right?
Oh, seriously, Helena, thank you so much. And it is such an honor. We've got in right fashion for what we're talking about. Lieutenant General Retired Morgan is here with me, and we also have Jean Vettel, Tien Pham, and Chris Milroy, who are on virtual. So we're going to be doing this in person and virtually, and just really appreciate having such esteemed panelists with me here today. What I wanted to start with is just to be able to ground who we are and what we're going to be talking about. Considering that you all came for a discussion on tech for tomorrow's battlefield, how concepts of the future drive investment today, I thought each of us, this is a problem for the Army, it's a problem for the Joint Force and Department of Defense, but it's also a challenge for our country, which is exactly why this is a topic here today. And so just really appreciate having the diversity among the panel. The other thing is that I fully intend to ask quite a few, allow for question and answers, because we want to make this to be as informative for you as possible. So both of those folks that are here in the room, but also online, if you have questions, Helena is going to help us with that. So what I wanted to do, though, is just very quickly what we do. So I'm the Army's Directorate of Concepts, and for that we do 4 things. So we do Army concepts, and that's the concept community, but it's also working with scientists and technologists. What is the future? What's the possible future? Working also with the threat community. So it's not just us that's changing. There's others in the world that are changing. So trying to make sure that we are informing the concepts of the future for the Army. We also do Army wargaming, and there are many parts of the Army that do wargaming. We have we call it Title 10, the Army senior leaders. They get to pick a topic that we are going to be studying. And right now that is focused on the future Army. So the Future Study Program is the title of that Army war game. But we also do joint concepts, because just like we'll never fight alone, we shouldn't be developing concepts alone. And so my team helps represents the Army within the joint warfighting concept, if you've heard that talked about. And then we also do wargaming, joint wargaming. Again, if you have an idea about the future, but you don't experiment and assess to see if it works better, it's really just an idea. So that's really what we do. Dr. Pham, would you mind introducing yourself and kind of how your expertise fits within this space?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to be here. My name is Tien Pham. I'm with the Army Research Lab. And so we focus on early and applied research. And what we're looking at is harnessing a lot of the research that's being done in AI, machine learning, and robotics and autonomy. And so for us, what we really want to do is focus the AI challenge within a complex multimodal environment. And what does that mean? So we want to be able to do is impress upon the researcher and the collaborators what are the real challenge problem that we should focus on. And so you can imagine like a city like Mosul, where it's a lot of activities going on. It's a lack of infrastructure. So you have a team of highly dispersed humans and robotic agents accessing heterogeneous information. So within that context, we have to learn with the new environment, with deception and persistent threat. And so this construct of dynamically learning and replanning at the speed of fight is very important. So if you're looking at AI machine learning today, it's very brittle and takes a lot of data, a lot of training time, a lot of resources. And so what we want to be able to do is find ways and innovation to be able to solve these problems to help the soldier understand and operate in this complex environment. And so some of the things that we've been looking at is really focus on what we call science in the dirt, or S&T in the dirt. It's really trying to bring the research from collaboration with university, industry, and coalition partner out into the field as early as possible. And without waiting for maturity, we want to have an opportunity to do experiment and also collect relevant data. And so I'll be happy to discuss more of that as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Vettel.
Hello, so I'm Dr. Jean Vettel. I'm the Chief Scientist for the Futures and Concept Center, and I have this amazingly awesome position where we are working on realizing a bunch of Army Futures Command's intention for really modernizing the Army fast and as agilely as we can against a thinking pure competitor in the future. So a lot of what we've been working on recently is how to actually work this segue between how we, in the technical side, need metrics that drive how the technical advancements can help the Army with what folks on the operational side need in terms of the operational metrics to achieve an advantage against a peer competitor. So this focus on the metrics or the ways that we can quantify the difference between or the needs between the communities, I think also really drives well with what we're going to talk about on this panel today, where we're working across community, and eventually when we're in the capability development phase, we want to pull in our industry partners for all of their innovation as well in the process. So I really look forward to the dialogue today for working across these, not just within the government community, but across government industry as well.
Thanks,
Over.
Jean. Thanks. And Chris, Mr. Milroy.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. Chris Milroy, data scientist at NVIDIA. NVIDIA creates the majority of the hardware and software that's used in modern AI, and also has one of the largest accelerator programs for startups working in that space. Has been long a partner with the federal government in accelerating the adoption of AI and machine learning advanced analytics in those spaces. So here to talk about that from the tech Silicon Valley angle.
Thank you so much. General Morgan, sir.
General, thank you. And to everyone, it's indeed a great opportunity to be here and talk to you about this important topic of technology, the battlefield, and the warriors. I'm John Morgan, and I'm a partner for IBM, co-leading the Army account. But before I even got into that, spent a few years on active duty as a combat arms officer, warfighter, in a number of different places. And I think the uniqueness of what it is in a company like IBM and what it brings to the discussion, first of all, changing a culture to collaboration, cooperating with Army partners and small business to create a dialogue around all kinds of emerging capabilities and technologies. IBM in particular, in terms of design thinking, solutions, and how you bring those kind of new capabilities forward with partners in the small business space, with the Army, hybrid cloud capabilities, and how we're able to think about leveraging and maneuvering data. When you think about being able to do that, you've got to be able to secure it. So therefore, securing it in a multi-domain environment becomes extremely important, and these are capabilities that I know that IBM brings to the discussion plate. And then that thing that's out there on the horizon, and we start talking about quantum computing and the ability to move and compute and analyze data at speed faster than our adversary. These are the kinds of things that I believe that IBM brings to this discussion that will help hopefully move the Army in the right direction and continue to work with partners in the industry space. So excited to be here.
Thank you. So I thought I would take serving as a moderator and a panelist a chunk of my words up front. And so maybe to frame a little bit about what we're doing in the space within concepts. But first, and I think these have been come up throughout the discussions today, but why Army Futures Command, working with our joint partners, what are some of the problems that we're trying to address? And one of that is really to get that idea to solution. And so one of the challenges that we, for those of you that have worked with the Army, it just simply takes us a while. We found out that there were often many more people that could say no, that could say yes. And we were looking at trying to come up with things that we need and not fielding them for 7 years. And that's obviously a problem considering how fast things are changing today. One of the other challenges are, as far as, within the Army, we like to say someone's in charge, but even having what we would call a unity of effort. How do we know everybody is actually working in the same direction? And previously, my part of the Army, the concepts community, was completely distinct from the S&T community. So where Tien is from, where Dr. Vettel originally came from. Separate from that were people that were looking at the threat. Separate from that were people who were looking at the acquisition. And separate from that were people that were doing the experimentation. And so one of the efforts of having Army Futures Command is that it actually now helps bring most of them, at least, from an acquisition perspective, they are our right-hand partner on this. But how do we work together so that we're understanding the problems, we're understanding the opportunities, and moving forward together? And to have opportunities like the Army Applications Lab to have these discussions with partners, having the work with the acquisition sustainment for the industry to help us all from an Army, Department of Defense, and a community. And so what General Murray, he asked myself, and looking at the Futures and Concept Center, which is what we're a part of, about 13 months ago, is that when we look to the future, and we get to a time when you have artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomy, robotics, kind of underpinned by that data in the network, plus the quantum computing, plus synthetic bio, plus advances in energetics, and so forth. When you start having that come together kind of at scale, both on the civilian side, but to be able to impact things on the battlefield, how could we operate? And much less how must we be able to operate to make sure that we're able to achieve our objectives. And so that's really been the task that we've been looking at. So we started out with a lot of help from DEF CON to say we had 95 interviews with subject matter experts from the Army, from all the way through our country, from S&T, from ethicists and regional experts. What's that future even possible? At the same time, we had within that war game effort that we ran, we had 4 separate events. Several hundred people at each of them, bringing in defense and non-defense experts to help work through what does this mean for warfare? What does this mean for land warfare? How can science and technology solutions help us? And then in August at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, we actually tested it for the first time with our threat community. How would these ideas work better? And so lots of challenges, no doubt. But 2 of the challenges, and this is where I wanted to bring back, because I was very long-winded. 2 of the really big challenges we have that's already been talked about. So one is information. So we need to have the ability to see, to sense, to know what's happening. We need to be able to understand. We need to be able to communicate very rapidly. But we know that potential adversaries are going to try to stop us from doing that. And so, whether it's through AI and machine learning or whether it's from different sensors, what are the ways that we could be able to do some of the basic functions that militaries must do to be able to achieve our objectives? And then the second problem that we're seeing very keenly is sustained operations. And so if we're going to be operating in a space where we have, whether it's sensor saturation or near ubiquitous sensors, or take your pick, whatever term, it's really going to be hard to hide. It's really going to be hard to achieve surprise. And if you bring large groups together, you're a really easy target. And so we think one of the future of how we are operating differently, but if we're going to be spread out over larger distances, we also then have to sustain operations. And we, Army, are really good at it, but we are also good at moving large mountains of stuff. And so, and a non-doctrinal term stuff. But we'll need fuel, food, water, medicine, to be able to go in places where it's needed. And so I think these are things that have civilian application in addition to helping the military. And so these are some of the challenges that we're looking at. And I think as we're looking at the concepts driving future investments, those are some of the challenges we're really working on, and would really welcome, maybe I could throw it to Tien, If you have anything about how you're addressing some of these, and then we'll go through and have the discussion, please.
Sure. Well, thank you. As you have alluded to, we have many challenges within this context. So one of the things that we've been really trying to do, and I think we were in the previous session that talks a lot about collaboration, how to best work with academia, industry, and small businesses to really, find innovation and then drive it to transition to programs. So I was fortunate enough to be involved with one such event recently. It's part of the X-Tech Church. This is really focused on targeting small businesses. And so what we were asked to do is through this office, we asked to come up with a problem that's important to the Army and then develop what are technical challenges. And then what we would work with the office is to make this challenge be available to the small businesses only. So what we wanted to do was to have session like this throughout the whole process to tell the companies what are the challenges we're facing, and they have questions. And then we develop a challenge topic for specifically what they need to do, and then help them along to understand the context and how their solution can help the Army. So the challenge topic that we were involved in recently was focused on how we can use AI ML algorithms and tools to enable analytics capability in resource-constrained environment. Specifically, what we wanted to do was how do we do multimodal learning and not just focus on whether it's text or video or so forth, because that's the environment that the MDO challenges that we were facing, is that data is coming from everywhere, whether it's coming from software agent, robotic agents, humans, whether it's in cyber domain or physical domain. So having that particular problem and explain to them and give them the use case, I think we were able to attract 30 different companies. This particular challenge was involving international partners. So 30 international company, and we were able to select 3 companies that can helpfully transition their capabilities to some experiments that we're planning in the future, specifically feeding into project convergence. So really it's that engagement and the constant engagement where we want to help reduce the barrier for entry in terms of collaboration, provide them with the resources, and then tell them where data technology can help affect the overall challenge that we're facing. Because innovative solution can come from anywhere, and we really need to be able to harness that. Over.
Thanks. Dr. Vettel?
There we go. Sorry, mic issues. I want to talk. So in the future study program this year, one of the things that the Beyond 2035 concept hypothesizes is that, as AI, autonomy, and robotics mature by that time frame, we may actually have the first movement without any humans involved. And so we've been having a bunch of different discussions of, well, what would that actually also entail that we haven't necessarily thought about traditionally? And think of the machine warfare itself. The nature of even what deception would mean is different. If you were to have autonomous forces out and one of them breaks down, well, then you actually need to have autonomous platforms that are focused also on repairing if you don't want to lose, different assets in the field. Similarly, in terms of information, like the way that you spoof a human or deceive a human is also different from the way that you deceive a machine. And so what all does that actually entail for different, tactics, techniques, and procedures that we would actually use? So I think a bunch of these different spaces of innovation and ways that we can kind of bring minds together about what might be possible is a really interesting place that hopefully we can engage the audience with today. Over.
Absolutely. And I think General Murray's continuing press is what could be, not what is, what could be. So thanks. And Chris?
Yeah, look, we're seeing a world, right, where, and we recognize this is now pretty broadly widespread, that the tools that used to be accessible, entirely or almost entirely to governments, right, to DoD, are easily accessible, right, where you can literally rent supercomputers, right, on the cloud, or where you can have access to, state-of-the-art open source AI techniques, right? And in that kind of world, I think that really draws out what the last two folks were describing, right? Which is we're entering a space where a lot of these terms get redefined, right? What does deception look like in a world where we fundamentally aren't creating perception the same way, right? And the ability for that to change, not just for a single threat, but across all of the whole threat spectrum overnight, because some new technology proliferates, I think draws on the way the government can use companies, startups especially, but even the platforms being created by large tech companies to use that as sensors of a different kind out in the world for what is coming next and how to stay ahead of it. Over.
Great point.
I'm going to go back a few years here. And as the Army, back around the turn of the millennium here, the Army was into what was called the series of Army After Next war games. Army After Next was essentially used as a way, not at first to transform the Army, but it was a methodology that was put together by the senior leadership to inform ourselves about what the future looks like. So if I go back and I think about what we were trying to do in 95 to 99 through the series of Army After Next, 4 years of wargaming and thinking about the future, to the point that leadership would say in 95, go out to the year 2020 and then pivot, steer back and look back at yourself and figure out what are the things that you need, what could be possible in the area of technology that we can bring forward and begin the development process so that we can bring it into the service. We're dealing with those same challenges again today. And if you think about, well, what does the horizon look like out in 2035 and 2040? One of the big things that I think we all see is, and you talked about being able to sustain the force, being able to maneuver the force. How about being able to maneuver data in this kind of an environment? Not just moving data, maneuvering data. And maneuvering data for commanders to be able to make decisions rapidly in a fast-paced environment. And so when you think about whether that is converging all the ERPs in a sustainment system to then be able to have it readily available to sustain the force or understand what it means from a budgeting perspective, leveraging capabilities like hybrid cloud and understanding what that means to the Army and to warfighters. I kind of consider myself as, you're still that warfighter. How do I get my hands at that data, at that information, at the time where I need it in this multi-domain complex environment that requires me to make the decision and be able to save lives? And I think the teaming that goes on between small businesses, startups, folks with wonderful capabilities and technologies, and how do you design solutions? Those are the things that I think that need to continue to work and collaborate with the Army in a way that can demonstrate that capability that, here is the realm of possible for the future.
And so I'd like to follow up with a question with Chris and you, as far as you're trying to, you've been on now both sides. How do you, looking at what are changes, what are ways that those that are interested to reach out? Do you have any words of additional wisdom that you could give? And I think, Chris, if I could follow up with you, the same question.
So when I transitioned from the service, I kind of went small business first, from small business to a large integrator, and then have now moved on with current company at IBM. And one of the things that I kind of go back to is even being on the small business side is one, and I think I heard it in a previous panel, is because the Army is looking to build things and grow things at scale, what are the specific niche capability things that I can go after and then continue to pursue that with the larger integrators in a collaborative, developmental DevSecOps way that allows us to be able to take those emerging capabilities from wonderful technology companies and be able to then bring it at scale size back to the Army to continue to develop it. And as I mentioned about this series of war games, Project Convergence is the 2021 version of Army After Next. When you think about it in terms of studying what it is that we need to do, you've got to be engaged. You've got to be involved. You've got to participate in those events and bring those capabilities so that the services get an opportunity to see it, work with it, play with it in the dirt as was described, so that we can get on with the development and giving capability at speed to the force.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple. So one challenge that we heard expressed, in fact, in the last panel was how do we take things that are available on the outside, right, and have them work in a higher sensitivity security classification environment, right? One of the things that we certainly have been excited about is, because the same core foundational technologies apply both inside and outside government, being able to, say, train an AI model on the outside and then bring that inside is much easier than bringing a full software platform, right? Again, you're transitioning at that point math effectively, right? A bunch of numbers. So that's one, is I think the barriers for that have probably never been lower from a software perspective. Second, when we think about kind of how easy it is to scale, right? To Mr. Morgan's point, ultimately the ability to try both at massive scale, right? Be able to take the same code, the same technology, and easily scale it up to cloud size, or down to, embedded credit card size chip, because it's the same technology. Again, that's a capability that really hasn't existed historically and enables a different kind of thinking about, kind of cloud all the way to edge and data center. And then finally, major organizations, IBM, NVIDIA, we're running significant startup acceleration capabilities, right? Programs. Ours is called Inception. For folks who are looking to access these technologies, there are great platforms like that where it's designed to kind of move you as quickly as possible through those early stages and get to the point where somebody like AAL can take that and turn it into, a program that ultimately become program of record. So lots of incredible resources out there I think are new conceptually, even in engaging with the government.
Yeah, no, that's super. And I think one of the priorities that General Murray has, pressed for all of us is it has to be persistent modernization. We have to continue to learn. And some of the things that we're doing in the far future, that technology is still deep in the labs, or we're working at that basic and applied. The benefit of Project Convergence is that those are technologies that we can get in the dirt. And so again, depending on where the maturity of the science and technology, Army Futures Command is trying to find different vehicles by which we can start testing and assessing, does this work better than what we're doing now? And so, really trying to get as many the Americans and others who are trying to solve these problems together.
Let me also add too, and you kind of triggered in my mind here, in a sense that when you think about research and development in emerging technologies, where some of the larger integrators really help in this regard with small startup businesses with wonderful technologies and capabilities, is the ability to bring that forward and continue to work with the larger integrators to help continue to develop that and build that and create that capability, so that 4, 5, 6, 10 years from now, those new capabilities are ready for the Army when they need them for the environment that we're going to fight in. Being able to probably sustain that over that long period of time without the collaboration and cooperation between small business, large integrators, understanding the requirements of the Army so that we get it right and then deliver it for the warfighter in the field. And I would be remiss, at the end of the day, these capabilities have to be in the hands of soldiers.
Absolutely.
And soldiers have to have the ease of being able to leverage modern technology without all of the sophisticated behind the scenes complications. They've got to be able to press a button and make things happen. that's out there, but you've got to exercise with it and you got to play with it in the dirt, as you described.
Absolutely. And I think that's the vision of how do we get most units in the Army being incubators. And so our soldier touch points where we have good ideas, we have technology, let's give it to actual operators to see how does this work and how can we make it better. So Dr. Vettel, Dr. Pham, anything else, or are we good to jump to questions?
Just one real, if I may open the question, give the audience a little time. I'm curious, as we think about the desire and need for this rapid interoperability so that new innovations get weaved in, particularly in the information space, what thoughts do we currently have of also preventing that to be an easy attack surface for a peer competitor who will also have similar sophistication in their understanding of our technology and in fact are likely collaborative partners in the research that's developing it today. So I'm just curious from your perspective, of the two perspectives of our industry collaborators who've been talking about innovation in this space, what are we also thinking in terms of the security and making sure that doesn't become an easy attack surface ever?
Is that a question to me?
Or we can ask Chris.
Let's go to Chris here first, okay?
No, it's a great question, right? We hear and try to respond to these questions all the time. One of the many ways, right, that we think about security is ultimately, in some sense, of course, this is our bias. Compute has become an arms race, right? Of who's got and who's most effectively using compute, because in many cases the solution to a perception or other computational problem, right, when there's kind of a concern about adversarial action, is just more or better compute, right? One of the things that we do in NVIDIA when we put out technologies, generative technologies, for instance, right, that we recognize people could put to all kinds of uses, is precisely making sure that we have an understanding. We've gone beyond the public understanding of these things, so that we understand how they could be misused and identify ways to detect that, right? Similarly, when it comes to we're talking about maneuvering data, right? One of the hardest things for handling data is going to be how do we work in a zero trust environment and yet, right, have data be where it needs to be when effects need to happen. And that's, again, it becomes, from our perspective anyway, a computational challenge of we have to layer something else on top that lets us not just be reactive, siloed, and defensive, but proactive in the same way that when we have a problem with people, right, we try to manage those people problems with people. So, we see an incredible amount of solutions using much the same techniques that ultimately, lead to the challenges. So at least the positive part of that is there are solutions and they just wait for us to find them.
Let me piggyback, and especially what Chris just said, because the idea of a zero trust environment sort of becomes the key buzzwords that folks are talking about in industry, and how do you create that? First of all, you have to start with the understanding that, and this is just the warfighter coming out in me. This environment is going to be competitive.
Yes.
Okay, there's no doubt about it. And the idea that you think that you can protect everything and have it all locked down, if you start with that as a basic assumption, my belief is that you're headed for failure. And so you have to recognize the competitive environment. You have to come up with the creative solutions like zero trust environments where you can in fact operate. But one of the things I learned a long time ago as a younger commander was the fact that in seeing yourself, seeing the enemy, seeing the terrain in which you operate on, and then being able to reverse engineer against that, to be able to move your information and your data and your forces and your supplies at the right time, at the right place, based upon the information and the data that's available. And I come back to this notion of being able to rapidly maneuver, not just move, maneuver data so that a commander can be ahead of the adversary in this competitive fight, because it is going to be back and forth.
Helena, are there any questions that people have?
So if my microphone is on, the Hopin community should be able to ask questions now. So for anyone listening, if you have questions for the team here, please put them in the chat. Should be on the far right-hand side of your Hopin screen. Otherwise, if anyone has questions here, we're happy to pass around the microphone. Anyone like to start? Yes, let me bring you the mic. I wasn't looking behind me. Thank you for speaking up. No, I appreciate it.
Hi, so can you hear me?
You can. Thank you.
Yes.
Let me just yell and do it. So my question is for the threats concepts, how for the technology, the future technologies, or even like near future to 2035 and beyond technologies of peer adversaries, how does the threat concepts reconcile that with technologies that are just ethically unavailable to the United States? And is not just in regards to information, but also into deterrence in general. And so thank you. And that's for everyone.
Great question. Thank you.
So I will start, and then I'd welcome others coming in. I think, and I really appreciate the question on the ethics, and that was one. It was like we're going to leave time at the end. I think one of the underlying stated requirements of what we're doing is that American principles are at the core of who we are and how we're going to fight in the future. We need to understand how adversaries could fight, and we expect will fight, not to replicate it, but to make sure that we can mitigate that risk as much as possible. But at the end of the day, I want my kids and eventually their kids to be proud of what I'm doing. And so we have to have these discussions now. This is why, so the Lieber Institute is at West Point. They specialize in the law of armed conflict. Army Futures Command held a half-day session earlier this year that General Murray chaired, and we talked about this with people who, from academia and from the practitioner community. What does it mean when you have the ability, not Terminator v. Terminator, we're not seeing those yet, but the ability to prosecute lethal force without humans being involved? In the Gulf War in 1990-91, from a defense perspective, we've had these technologies for a long time. What we're trying to make sure is before those technologies exist to be able to use on battlefield, we as Americans and those that are coming at this perspective, wanting freedom, expecting to have transparency with their people, that we're starting these discussions now, because there are going to be challenges in the future, and we don't want to wait for the future to have those discussions. But I would welcome any of the other panelists about how some of these challenges are fitting into their line of work as well.
Hi, this is Tian. I can potentially answer. That's a really good question, and something we grapple with all the time. I think one of the exciting research that's happening that we've been involved information science and human science. It's really looking at human-centered machine learning and so forth. And so one of the things we want to be able to do is, because we're operating in a complex, deceptive environment, we don't have data ahead of time. We don't know exactly what's the situation is. To overcome the lack of data, we've developed techniques to have human in-the-loop reinforcement learning. Okay, so by doing that, you're actually training the machine learning algorithms and system to be able to overcome a lot of technical challenges. But it's also, you can have those nuances, right? Things that you care about, things you don't care about. So potentially that's a way to think about in terms of fighting ethically and building into that. The fact that you're building a system that's going to be developed by humans and the user, then there's going to be a little bit of trust into the system as well. So then you'll be able to impart some of the human aspect, if you will, in terms of that. Now, we haven't explored that specifically, but I think that also goes toward some of the things that we care about in terms of how do we want to make sure that the machine learning algorithms are behaving ethically. Over.
Thanks.
Let me add, and you eloquently brought it up. We're a values-based nation. In talking about the Army, we're a values-based Army. And I think the values that you see in, company like IBM that understands the emergence of new technologies are already having these kinds of discussions about how these applications and new technologies can be leveraged in support of U.S. national security. And as long as that dialogue is going on and the discussions are happening, just like we have dealt with the emergence of indirect fire weapon systems and how and which and when you employ them to reduce the kinds of collateral damage, we will do the same things with the technology that comes along in 2030 and beyond. So I'm not as concerned about not being able to leverage or use the technology as much as thinking about it, having the discussion about it, and as General Ahern said, far enough in advance so a values-based nation and a values-based Army knows how to properly employ it and use it.
I think we're out of time. That's what this thing is bleeping.
It's telling you that you're done?
Yeah.
Well, darn. Okay. Well, I know that we had some other really good questions, but I also know that there's networking after this. So please stick around. We're happy to continue the conversation. And thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for finishing on time. Oh my gosh. Thank you so
all
much.
so much too.
Thank you, sir.